It's March 23, 2017, and a group of 4 young men are living hard in Las Vegas, camped out in the VIP area of Dre's, a popular spot right in the centre of the city's neon-soaked strip. It's one of the most expensive clubs in town, but money's no object for this oddball quartet. They're all dressed in flashy new suits and deep into bottle service, all courtesy of their leader, a diminutive Arab with short gelled hair and an unkempt beard. Mohammed Allawi doesn't look like the average drug kingpin, but boy, does he spend like one. Cars, homes, chains, sneakers. The American dream by way of Baghdad. Lil Wayne is performing on this particular Vegas night, and as he stalks across the stage, he spots Allawi and his crew passing round a massive bottle of Veuve Clicquot. It's a trashy call perhaps, but this is Sin City, and the bottle doesn't go unnoticed by the rap superstar. I don't know who these dudes is, he shouts out, but I need to be partying with them. It's only 3 years since Allawi was sleeping in his car, but in 2015 he set up a vendor account on the dark website Alpha Bay under the name Dope Boy 210, importing a pharmacopoeia and reselling it via the mailman. Now, 2 years down the line, Dope Boy 210 offers no fewer than 80 products, from Xanax and Adderall to fentanyl, the feared opioid tearing through America's cities. And Allawi is making huge amounts of cash. But he's a tech guy, not a pharmacist. And as hundreds of thousands of homemade pills flood the market, Dope Boy 210 begins to rack up victims and interest from law enforcement. In fact, just before the Vegas bender, a mechanic had fished a strange black box out of the undercarriage of one of Allawi's luxury vehicles, a tracking device. The discovery had alarmed Allawi, as well it should. But, he'll later admit, I needed money, and I had to keep things going. The crew down their champagne and get over their come-downs. Vegas is Vegas after all. But their empire is about to come crashing down too. Thousands of miles east at a house party in the town of Richlands, North Carolina, some other friends are handing out a batch of Allawi's pills. For one of them, it'll be the last thing he does. And his death will send Dope Boy 210 and its high-flying scions on a tailspin collision course with the law. This is the Underworld Podcast. Hello and welcome to a weekly show presented to you by 2 reporters who've researched organised crime for some of the world's biggest media outlets and have the failed mortgage applications to show for it. I'm Sean Williams, magazine writer who flogged the dead horse of print media to its mince, and I'm joined by documentary maker and broadcaster Danny Gold in New York, who's about to tell us a funny story from, I don't know, Central African Republic. Go.
I don't know. The only hotel that was legitimately safe to stay in was like $300 a night, which was way over our budget. So I had to stay in a room with my insane cameraman who was very insane, but very talented and would spend a lot of time arguing with his wife on Skype. Very uncomfortable for me to listen in. And there was a shady Lebanese diamond dealer who I'm pretty sure is on government lists who would buy us whiskey every night. And that's pretty much all I got for now.
That's pretty good. Why are all photographers lunatics? That's something I need to know. Anyway, thanks for tuning in as always, guys. Check out the Patreon for bonuses. I think we've actually got quite a lot going up there this week, thanks to El Mayo. Reading list, show notes, and the odd short. And we're up on Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, TikTok. We're on TikTok, right?
Yeah, our friend Lily does TikTok for us, so check that out. And patreon.com/underworldpodcast for bonuses, as well as on iTunes and Spotify. You can sign up.
All right, TikTok. Very, very young and cool. That is who I am. Anyway, and Spotify, I think you can leave comments on the show now, so say nice stuff about us. Don't be like the weirdos on YouTube and moan about things they're getting for free. No criticism, remember, guys, just praise. Okay, cool, let's go. So this week's show is going to dive into the life and crimes of Mohammed Allawi, sorry to Arabic speakers, a.k.a. Dope Boy 2010, or Dope Boy 210, a.k.a. the Fentanyl King, who got so rich off dark web drugs, even Lil Wayne wanted a party with him. A lot of the episode is coming from a great 2023 Wired feature by Benoit Morin, who's currently down in Houston, Texas, covering the Shell and LNG industries for the Wall Street Journal, which is a bit of a right turn after this piece. So please click on the site, read the story, subscribe to Wired, pay your journalists, folks. Keep all the tech sheds for killing the business altogether. You want to know a scary fact about local media in the US?
Sure, yeah.
7% of all reporters now work for the New York Times. Ouch.
And, don't worry if you can't guess if a reporter works for the New York Times. They'll tell you 12 times in like the first 5 minutes you're talking to them. So should be all right. You'll be fine.
This story, though, it's a real doozy. And I'm going to get into some other dark web shenanigans that have made headlines in recent years. Not least the Russian site Hydra, which I actually discussed with friend of the pod, Nico Vorobryov, about a year ago, I think it was now. But the story of the fentanyl king, that begins a long, long way from Las Vegas or North Carolina in Baghdad, Iraq, which in 2003, of course, is invaded by troops belonging to the US, UK, Australia and Poland, which I didn't know was part of the coalition. You don't need me to tell you that this is a brutal campaign and one which drops soldiers from nations who don't understand Arabic language or culture, and coalition forces soon realise that they're going to need an army of interpreters if they really care about winning the hearts and minds of the Iraqi people. Now, Mohammed Allah Allawi is a 13-year-old suburban kid when the war begins, and his doctor uncle persuades him to learn English from a young age. 5 years later, the 18-year-old Allawi, he applies to become an interpreter for the US Army. He's one of over 50,000 Iraqis and Afghans who interpret for Americans during those two campaigns, and it is a perilous existence. Interpreters are considered traitors not only by Al-Qaeda operatives, but pretty much everybody in the country, and they're stalked by gangsters and death squads on a daily basis.
I mean, I wouldn't say everyone in the country. Like the Kurds in the north certainly didn't feel that way. I mean, they have statues of George W. Bush because they hated Saddam so much. So, but a lot of people probably definitely south of that line demarking the KRG from the rest of Iraq.
That's fair. What's going on right up there at the moment? I think it's pretty stable in Iraqi Kurdistan, right?
It's always been the most stable area by far. But yeah, some issues, I'm sure. I haven't paid too much attention, to be honest with you. It's always a perilous existence. Turkey's bombing them. Iraq is being Iraq. And yeah, anyway, moving on.
Yeah, the Kurds are always getting screwed at some point. Anyway, Allawi's scared enough that he goes around on patrols in gloves and a mask in case anybody recognizes him. Since 2016, by the way, the non-profit No One Left Behind, it estimates that over 300 interpreters have died, but many more are in danger too. Allawi claims that one of his friends is tied by insurgents to the back of a car and dragged around the streets until his limbs tear off. Another is hung from an electric pole and left for days as a warning. But he makes good money with the Americans, around $1,350 a month, which is very, very good in Baghdad. And despite their many cultural missteps, he makes really good friends with the troops as well. He's also got a good nose for a side hustle. For a while, Allawi provides steroids to troops on base. The things are all over the place, and he makes a tidy profit. Then he's kicked out of the US Army for that, but he immediately finds work with one of the many private contractors working in Baghdad, where he's put to task translating operation manuals for Humvees, those giant 4x4s, which the US is reselling to Iraq. That is, of course, boring as hell. But sitting at a computer, Allawi realizes that he's got a knack for IT, and he spends half his time learning to code and hack, which is correct and good, and something all human beings should do, especially journalists, of course. What Allawi does next, allegedly, is pretty awesome, or pretty underhand. According to a friend, Eric Goss, Allawi hacks his boss's email, grabs messages to his mistress, and sends them to his wife. He also hacks into the firm's wireless network. This guy is pretty formidable, and he uses his newfound skills to form a dating site aimed at connecting Iraqis called Iraqiya. This thing gets so big that Allawi is making $5,000 a month off it. That's at a time when Iraq's GDP per capita is only $6,500 a year. He's rich. He's a tech bro. He's going to be a star, but that doesn't stop the fact that Allawi's home city is a basket case, beset by violence, terror, suicide bombs. So on September 12, 2012, using a visa given to those who'd helped Uncle Sam in Iraq, Allawi hops on a plane from Baghdad to San Antonio, Texas, where he's going to start a new life in the US. I guess there's not a direct flight for that route. Now, when he first rocks up in the Lone Star State, Allawi is hooked up with a driver's license food stamps, a $200 per month stipend, and a place to stay, courtesy not of the state, but a bunch of Catholic charities. And Allawi, he flies right at his American dream. He enrolls in a pre-nursing college course, but the tap, or faucet, I guess, begins to get turned off. The food stamps and rent run dry after 6 months. Allawi gets a factory job, but the salary barely keeps his car running, and the tuitions that he's paid. So he moves into an apartment with a fellow former interpreter named Mohammed Al-Salihi, who's working as a bouncer, and they rent a spare room on Craigslist to a young woman who's a bit of a party animal with a penchant for weed.
It's a shame this gets dark because this kind of has the makings of a great sitcom right now.
It would be awesome, actually. According to Allawi, which he tells the reporter Benoit Morin, there's an American saying, quote, "If you hang around the barbershop too long, you'll end up with a haircut." Danny Gold, an actual American, is this a saying?
I mean, I haven't really heard it. Maybe it's like a Texas or like Southern thing, but I approve of it. You know, it's a pretty logical conclusion, and I always respect barbers.
Yeah. I mean, if you go to a barbershop, you're probably going to get a haircut, right? That's just going to a barbershop. Anyway, I don't know. It's not Oscar Wilde, but I suppose we get the point. Allawi starts selling weed. But dealing weed is not the Sinaloa cartel, although the Sinaloa cartel very much are selling weed these days.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of a certain internet crime personality who claims he was selling weed for the Sinaloa cartel. But no, you were definitely not. Anyway.
This is dipping your toes into a podcast beef, is it?
No, not really.
And despite all of his wheeler dealing, Allawi is evicted from his flat in 2014 for failing to pay $590 in rent. For a while, he sleeps in his car. Then he switches up and he sells blow on the streets. But this is, of course, a pretty shaky living. On January 14th, 2015, Allawi's arrested while driving around San Antonio with a local dealer, and cops find a small amount of gear, 10 Adderall pills, and around 100 Xanax. He gets done for manufacture and delivery of a controlled substance. But Allawi doesn't have a criminal record, and he's handed a community sentence. Again, Allawi at this point turns back to computers. An Austin company asked him to design a website, but just as he's done back home in Baghdad, Allawi uses the access to build something way, way bigger on the side. Now, you could argue that 2015 is a kind of high point for mass media hysteria over the so-called dark web. That is, according to Kaspersky, a hidden part of the internet not indexed by regular search engines, accessed through specialized browsers like Tor, which host both illegal and legal activities offering anonymity, but also posing risks like scams and illicit content. I'm sure we got plenty of techie listeners, but a quick rundown. The internet is basically comprised of 3 layers. So the surface web, so stuff you can actually see, and access with traditional browsers like Chrome or Safari, that's about 5%, just 5%. If you're visualizing this as an iceberg, this is the little tiny tip poking out of the ocean. Next, there's the deep web. This is about 90% of everything online, and it's anything from private databases to intranets, legal files, messaging app caches, online store backends, so on and so forth. It's stuff you can't search for, but the vast majority of it is legal and safe. But the dark web, so the remaining 5% of the iceberg, I guess you could characterize it as the bit at the very bottom, obscured from light and accessible only via a special built submersible able to scour the cold dark depths of the ocean. Yeah, sorry, I am continuing to hammer this metaphor home with as much skill as a Russell Brand monologue. So that submersible would be a piece of software like the Tor browser, which you need to access the dark web, something that was actually developed by the US Navy in the mid-1990s using something called onion routing or routing, which is layers of encryption that peel away, like an onion. It's not rocket science. Leading you to hidden and secure sites that aren't indexed, i.e. able to be found by surface-level search engines like Google. This is why everyone's listening to this show, isn't it? The dark web is virtually untraceable, and anybody who gets into it is anonymous, unless they do something really stupid, of course, like post something with their name. And this is where the illegal stuff happens. Counterfeit currency, forged documents, arms trafficking, credit card fraud, and, of course, drug deals. Now, you'd be shocked how old this is. In fact, the first e-commerce transaction was a drug deal. Want to guess how old? Well, I'd be impressed if you said 1971, because that's the year a bunch of Stanford University students used ARPANET, which is a kind of proto-internet, to buy an undetermined amount of cannabis. Yes, one of the first uses of the internet anywhere on earth was to buy weed. And future so-called dark web marketplaces, from the Hive in the 90s to something called the Research Chemical Mailing List in 2003, the year the US invaded Iraq, are used to buy drugs and share tips and skills on how to make them. If you want to know more about this stuff, by the way, check out Mike Power's Drug 2.0, very cool book about how the internet transformed the narco industry.
I feel like around 2012, there was like a realization among, some people that like nerds always had, and like engineering kids always had the best drugs because they'd figured out all the stuff that we're getting into right now. And, they would get like pure MDMA and other things of that sort just shipped to them, like UPS,
Yeah. I remember when we were students at uni, some friends of mine were just getting like incredible high grade stuff posted through the mail. And yeah, it was a bit of a revelation. I guess it was like a similar kind of time, like 2005, 2006. Anyway, the biggest breakthrough since ARPANET for dark web drugs arguably arrives a few years later in 2011 with Silk Road, founded by Texan Ross Ulbricht under his pseudonym Dread Pirate Roberts. This marketplace combines Tor with Bitcoin for complete anonymity, and its notoriety skyrockets with the publication of a June 2011 Gawker article by Adrian Chen called The Underground Website Where You Can Buy Any Drug Imaginable. Making small talk with your pot dealer sucks, writes Chen. It's not always the case, is it? Buying cocaine can get you shot. Okay. What if you could buy and sell drugs online like books or light bulbs? Now you can. Welcome to Silk Road. Sounds like one of our cold opens. Anyway, we're obviously going to do a Silk Road angle at some point down the line, probably by the time we've done like episode 698 on female bandits on East Timor, or 2,304 on Inuit space dealers to the sons and daughters of Tajik dictators. But if you're listening to this show, you probably know that in 2013, when Allawi himself is struggling to settle into his new American life, feds arrest Ross Ulbricht on 7 charges, including drugs and money laundering ones. They order him to forfeit almost $200 million and hand him a life prison sentence. They also shut down Silk Road. Nick Bilton's American Kingpin is a great read about the rise and fall of Ulbricht, and it's pretty pulpy thriller, good fun. But of course, this being the dark web, when Silk Road disappears, another bunch of markets just pop up right in its place. Agora, I'm not sure. Utopia, The Real Deal, and even Silk Road 2.0, which is founded by admins of Ulbricht's former site. By 2015, the biggest of these sites is something called Alpha Bay, opened by a Canadian citizen living in Thailand named Alexander Kays. And it's this site that Mohammed Allawi turns to when he decides to leverage his Austin web design job into something far more lucrative. At first, Allawi purchases a $600 manual pill press on eBay. Then he switches up to a $5,000 model, able to spit out almost 22,000 pills an hour. Then he gets to work, buying inactive ingredients for drugs like dyes on eBay and other more controlled substances like methamphetamine. It's quite a bit more controlled than a food dye on the dark web. He mixes them up, throws them in the press, and boom. He's basically packaging low-grade Yaba pills as fake Adderall and Xanax and selling them to students on Alpha Bay under the username DopeBoy210, 210 being the area code for San Antonio.
Yeah, don't put any sort of identifying materials in your username if you're using the internet to do crimes,
Yeah, that is solid advice. I mean, I feel like I made a mistake when I made my email Sean Williams 85 because now I'm old and useless and unemployable, and it shows the second I send an email. But anyway, Allawi doesn't care about what seems like a pretty big misstep, and he graduates from his fake study pills to fake OxyContin, which he laces with fentanyl bought from China on the dark web. Seems a completely great business model. You guys all know about fentanyl, up to 100 times more powerful than morphine, deadly even in tiny doses. Because of that, dealers love it. They can cut it up with other drugs in tiny amounts and make thousands of pills. And Allawi is not alone in doing this. Folks are buying huge amounts of fentanyl from China by 2015, supercharging an opioid crisis that's been kicked off by the pain merchants of Purdue Pharma, the creators of OxyContin. In 2011, barely 1,600 Americans had died from a fentanyl overdose. By 2016, it's hit 18,335, overtaking prescription painkillers and heroin. And the DEA at this point is waking up to the fentanyl crisis. Well, arguably. And it gets involved in Allawi's case when a student cop who's found out the pills are all over campus at UTSA, that's the University of Texas, San Antonio, contacts local cops who are in on a joint task force with the DEA. But officials know seemingly next to nothing about dark web markets despite Silk Road. They realise they're going to actually have to buy drugs from Allawi before they can shut him down. But so behind the curve are higher-ups, the investigating agent has to wait until March 2016 for a green light to use Bitcoin at all, which is the only payment Allawi will take. By this point, the DEA is all over Allawi's operation in real life, however. They're tapping his phone and that of Al-Salihi, his former interpreter pal who's working with him, and an accomplice named Benjamin Ita-Uno, who's basically his bag man. These three guys, plus Eric Goss, Allawi's old army friend, are the four main guys in the operation. One agent follows Uno from Allawi's home to a post office where he delivers 3 boxes and a trash bag full of envelopes. Pretty sus. And then comes the online sting. An agent buys 500 so-called Adderall for $1,400 in Bitcoin and an ounce of blow for another $1,200. He lists a mailbox at UTSA and he presses send on the order. More money for Allawi and his co-conspirators. He's making crazy amounts of money by this point. He's living in the suburb of Houston, but he's got property in San Antonio too. He's got cars, flashy clothes, a collection of expensive sneakers, gold chains, watches, the lot. He's got a condo in LA's upscale Westwood district, and he throws around cash at upmarket clubs. He gets glowing reviews on Alpha Bay, including one the DEA would later use in his case. It reads, quote, "Definitely takes a few extra days than states, but always shows up and always has extras!" Exclamation mark. Nice. Probably gets like 2 stars, judging by our reviews. He's not actually quite so generous with his deal he's unwittingly done with this DEA agent, though, who after a week of making the order picks up 447 pills and no cocaine. The agent opens a dispute with Alpha Bay, but he's off to the races. Here is more than enough evidence to raid Allawi. The following month, Allawi gets an order from a young Marine for OxyContin, pours his homemade concoction, including fentanyl, into a ninja blender, throws it in the press, and gives it to a member of his crew to post. The member's name is Sergeant Anthony Tognetti, and he's made the order with Corporal Marcos Villegas. They're both stationed at Camp Lejeune, near Jacksonville, North Carolina, and they take the pills to a party in the nearby town of Richlands. That night, Villegas hands a pill to a 20-year-old corporal named Mark Mambalal OD's. The next morning, his fellow revelers find him unresponsive and they get him to a hospital. But it's too late. Mambalal dies. Other people have close shaves with Allawi's pills, which isn't surprising given he's mixing them with all the skill of a hungover TGI Fridays barman. Taking them is a total lottery, Russian roulette, and the users have no idea. Dope Boy 210 is a death trap, and the DEA decides it's high time he was taken offline. Allawi discovers a tracking device around this time, and his boys go on their Vegas bender soon after that. On May 17, disguised as electricians, agents knock on the door of Allawi's Houston home. "Sorry, power's out," one tells the occupants, who are Uno and another man. "We're going to be working on it for a while. I'll let Benoit Morin take it from here at Wired." Quote, "At 1:38 p.m., men sweating profusely in hazmat suits swarm the house, lending an otherworldly look to this ordinarily quiet neighborhood. The suits were meant to protect the agents from fentanyl. There were 2 pill presses, cardboard boxes from China containing ingredients, and enough drugs to pull Allawi away for a long time. 500 grams of fentanyl powder, 500 grams of meth, 500 grams of cocaine, 10 kilos of fake oxycodone tablets laced with fentanyl, 4 kilos of fake Adderall laced with meth, and 5 kilos of counterfeit Xanax tablets. Agents found a Ruger revolver and a Sig Sauer pistol hidden in a couch in the living room. They walked out of Allawi's bedroom carrying an AR-15 style assault rifle and a loaded Glock pistol. Ouch, he's in trouble. Allawi by this point is living over 1,000 miles away at his LA condo, and he knows he's on borrowed time. That June, he and Eric Goss head to a club and order champagne. Allawi is quiet though, and he drives back in near silence. Then he tells his old friend, quote, "I feel like I'm a martyr. All my family's taken care of. If I die tomorrow, it wasn't in vain." Days later, the entire crew is swept up in raids across the country as part of what the DEA calls Operation Desert Eagle.
I can't believe they hadn't used that name before 2017.
I know. I mean, it's a cool name,
Yeah.
but yeah, I feel like, I don't know. It's weird, isn't it? And in July 2017, Allawi is indicted for conspiring to distribute fentanyl, meth, and cocaine, plus firearms and money laundering offences. It's estimated he sold at least 850,000 bogus pills across 38 states, netting him at least $14 million.
Wow. I mean, it really was the American dream right there.
I know. He's done pretty well off the backs of some dead people. Authorities sentenced him to 30 years in prison. Quote, "The United States welcomed Allawi into our country from war-torn Iraq in 2012, says US Attorney John Bash. But instead of taking advantage of the many opportunities this country affords, he decided to make money by peddling a deadly narcotic to Americans in the grips of addiction. I'm proud of our office and the law enforcement partners who uncovered and destroyed this conspiracy. 30 years in federal prison is a just sentence for this despicable conduct." Allawi's gang copped really long sentences too. Fernando Becerra, he's held accountable for all 850,000 pills alongside his boss, and he's given 22 years. "I'd like to apologise to the court and my family," Becerra says in court. "I take responsibility and want to see if I can get a second chance. We all make mistakes." The judge snaps back at him. "That's a big mistake over quite a period of time," he says. "I mean, we're not talking about a few joints." The fentanyl, he's been well and truly dethroned. A month later, authorities shut down Alpha Bay. But does either bust stem the tide of fentanyl flowing through the dark web into the United States? Of course not. Just as it happened when Silk Road went down, a host of Alpha Bay wannabes just pop up in its place, offering ever greater quantities of illegal substances. One of them is a Russian site called Hydra, which between 2016 and 2019 processes over $1 billion worth of illicit transactions, way more than Alpha Bay ever did. Hydra is even more sophisticated than its forebear. Rather than making vendors pay to open an account, it makes them pay rent of between $100 and $1,000 a month, and it even has chemists and human guinea pigs to test products, plus medics on standby if anything goes awry. Here's friend of the pod, Nico Vorobyov, writing in Vice in 2022. Quote, "There is a sub-forum when these test results are posted, complete with graphs, analysis and photos. If the gear's not up to scratch, the administration hands out penalties. Anyone trying to pass oregano as high-grade chronic will get kicked off the site. No fentanyl is allowed, and neither are weapons, hitmen, viruses, or porn. Although drugs, fake passports, dodgy SIM cards, and counterfeit cash are sold. Like a real-life video game, the online stores in Hydra employ drug dealers known as kladmen, treasure men, or droppers, I think in Russian, whose job is to stash drugs in GPS-tagged hiding spots ready to pick up by online buyers. It's a street tech workaround in a country where the postal system is slow and unreliable, and regular street drug dealing is highly risky. It is basically Pokemon Go for drugs. I interviewed Nico on Hydra last spring, so check out that on the Patreon if you can. German authorities shuttered the site in 2022, but there are still tons more sites out there today. From Brian's Club to Tours on Market, Abacus, they're selling fake goods, guns, precious metal, malware, drugs, and even contract kills.
Isn't the contract kills thing like always fake? Like, wasn't there something about that recently? Like, you know, at least the people offering them, not sure about like, I think there was something reported that like it's always like it's never actually been done. It's always been like a sting operation, or it's always just been fake.
I saw like one recent bust where a woman had hired a contract killer to do her husband on the dark web. But yeah, I know what you mean. There's loads and loads of weird stuff about that. I think that's one of the things that is questionable about the Silk Road case as well, because they did him on like a murder for hire plot, which I think has always been considered pretty shaky. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, when it comes to dark web stuff, like authorities and the media are still. They're just always like several steps behind, so you get a lot of weird reporting. Anyway, there's been a roll call of follow-up Allawis since 2017 too. In 2020, for example, feds bust the nationwide dark web trafficking network of Utah-based Aaron Shamo, who distributes fentanyl-laced oxycodone at the storefront Farmer Master. Shamo calls himself a, quote, white-collar drug dealer, drawing in former co-workers from a stint at eBay and signing off messages with smiley faces. One of his customers is a 21-year-old Californian named Ruslan Kliuev, who dies in his bedroom with one of Shamo's pill-filled envelopes at his feet. He's the only death for which Shamo is directly charged, but there are many, many more. An agent at Shamo's trial, which ends in him getting life imprisonment, compares his process to making chocolate chip cookies. Only if too many chocolate chips ended up in a cookie, whoever ate it would drop dead.
It's not a bad analogy.
Yeah, I prefer to go with like a quinoa salad, but with too many sort of like goji berries, and it could screw you up. Anyway, says Utah Attorney General Sean D. Reyes, quote, in 2016, Shamo sold 1 million fentanyl-laced fake oxycodone pills to unsuspecting buyers in every state in the union. While the total harm he caused can never be measured, at least 90 of his known customers have died from overdoses. Shamo, of course, isn't alone. In May last year, the DOJ arrests 288 people and seized 850 kilos of drugs in the US, Europe, and South America as part of an operation called Spector. Spector. Get it? Hello, fellow kids. And just a couple months ago, an Orange County, California resident named Tenzin Orgil, where is that name from? It's like Turkish or Mongolian, was sentenced to 168 months in federal prison for orchestrating a dark web meth and MDMA ring, cooked up in a clandestine lab. Here's Merrick Garland, noted online expert and US Attorney General, channeling Liam Neeson, quote, our message to criminals on the dark web is this. You can try and hide in the furthest reaches of the internet, but the Justice Department will find you and hold you accountable for your crimes. As if it even needs saying, I think we do so many stories now that touch on this. Fentanyl overdose deaths have only continued to rise since the takedown of the fentanyl king. In 2022, of almost 108,000 total overdose deaths, fentanyl accounts for almost 4/5. From 2020 to 2021, the number of arrests the DEA made from fentanyl grew 36%, overtaking arrests for heroin for the first time. Alpha Bay is back now, by the way, and there are tons of guys just like Allah Allawi, only with far less interesting backstories.
Yeah, it's too much hassle, from law enforcement. Just like start getting, peptides from China, get some Ipamorelin or some Melanotan. Just sell that. Like, you're not going to get raided by the feds for that.
All right, don't Instagram me crimes and sell whatever that is. Yeah, that's some good advice. And actually, a lot of this is research chemicals. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'd never heard of them, but if that's what you're into, that's cool. And actually, a lot of this is putting the plight of Ross Ulbricht, who is Silk Road's Dread Pirate Roberts' founder, of course, into sharper focus. He has always claimed that he was one of a clique to set up the site, not its sole mastermind. And contrary to early reports, it didn't offer hitmen, child porn, or guns, though there was a murder for hire plot, which again, I'm not going to get into because we don't have time. And it was like weird, but it did happen, but it was more like, screw you, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to do something. Like it was, I don't know, like it didn't really check out. And actually, this May, none other than Donald J. Trump promised to commute Ulbricht's sentence in an attempt to woo libertarian voters who've made the 40-year-old a champion of their cause. And this was just after Trump said he pardoned the Capitol rioters, so you can make your own conclusions about whether it's ingenuous or not. But yeah, the fentanyl king, dark web drug marketplaces, Alpha Bay, Hydra, Silk Road. This is now a staple of the narco world besides the big cartels, and it is not going away anytime soon, despite what the Attorney General says.
Yeah, that's a movie right there, man. It's a crazy story.
Yeah, it is. I hope he's got an option deal for that, because that was a really cool story for Wire as well.